Welcome to Emerging Tech Horizons. I'm Mark Lewis, the Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. And today I'm joined by Austin Branch, who is a professor of the practice at the University of Maryland's Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, or ARLIS, which is a UARC, a university-affiliated research center at the University of Maryland. Austin most recently served as the Technology and Integration Director for Information and Environment Capabilities under the Secretary of the Air Force, Concepts Development and Management. That was part of the Interdepartmental Personnel Act Services Agreement on loan to the DoD. Professor Branch joined ARLIS in July of 2020 as a noted subject matter expert and Department of Defense pioneer in the area of operations in the information environment. His primary applied research interest is developing models and solutions for U.S. government and partner nation technical and organizational methods and applications for effectively competing in the global information environment. So Professor Branch's professional experience spans over 35 years, from tactical and operational applications in both peacetime and conflict to serving as the strategic level as a Department of Defense senior leader, specifically as an executive at the National Counterterrorism Center and as an industry leader, pioneering efforts to influence human behavior to meet the U.S. and international interests and goals. He's noted for establishing a host of efforts at the intersection of technology and social sciences, including pioneering DoD's initial analysis and activities that utilize social media to understand and engage selected audiences across the globe. So incredibly impactful, incredibly important work. Professor Branch served over 30 years in the U.S. Army in uniform and senior civilian service, primarily in influence-related communications and in associated technical applications. So Austin Branch, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for joining us on this segment of our podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
So I'd like to start off by talking today a little bit about your work, and if I could, just could you tell us a few words about the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security? What is ARLIS? And then we'll get to the work that you're specifically doing at ARLIS.
Well, ARLIS, as you already pointed out, is a relatively new UARC, sponsored by the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, focused on a host of not only our scientific and technology needs and gaps and applied research efforts, but really we're one of the only UARCs that are focused on the human domain. We kind of spawned from an NSA UARC that was focused on languages, and if you wanted to identify, in my view, if you want to identify ARLIS, it's uniquely positioned to service this broader information competition space, not only at the intersection of technology and the cognitive sciences, and that's where our adversaries have concentrated their efforts, and this is where our applied research lab is concentrating many of its efforts. Imagine cybersecurity at the intersection of cognitive science. So it's very interesting, and it's a wonderful place to work and serve, and not only serve our nation's efforts, but it's also the center of a university consortia focused on intelligence and security. I mean, that's in its name, and that is a really acutely needed concentration of efforts to not only serve intelligence security, but also, as I mentioned, the cognitive sciences. So there's a lot there, and we can. My focus is on the information side of the house, and that's what I'm prepared to speak about today.
Excellent. And of course, being a UARC, many of our listeners may know, but some may not, that UARC is a very special construct. Mm-hmm. It's similar to an FFRDC, a federally funded research development center, except it's affiliated, as the name implies, with the university. But it builds a special relationship with a government sponsor. It has a unique understanding of that sponsor's needs. And I think the creation of the UARCs and the FFRDCs, it represents, I think, one of the crowning achievements in our federal S&T landscape to create these D5 centers. So
that's exactly right. Imagine being a trusted agent, being Switzerland, essentially, for all these different actors, both in the private sector, the government, and the academia. Right at the center of that, you'll have these UARCs and FFRDCs who operate in this space where we can apply some advanced thinking and technological, methodological applications to solve problems. And it's, again, you're right. It's kind of this engine room for solutions.
Yeah, I also I don't want to make this a 30-minute plug for UARCs, but I love the concept of the UARCs, and
Yeah,
especially the fact that they reach into the universities, and so they also help us address some of the workforce issues that we are so concerned about across the government. Um, it's a again a vital contribution.
it is, and I'll tell you, it's even particularly vital for the areas that I work in, where we don't our the cadre of professionals in the information and supporting the information environment or operations in the information environment is really lean. So the ability to inform and develop and identify, new blood coming out of our university systems, coming out of these great students and thought leaders that are coming out of our academic institutions are critical. And the ability to kind of shape that and engage, and really, frankly, as you know, Mark, you get tested by these young folks,
You sure
and
do.
they really they ask some hard questions,
Yeah,
and that's incredibly powerful and useful.
I agree. I always used to say my favorite classes to teach were, say, the sophomore level classes, because those are the ones where they don't know enough yet that they'll ask those basic questions that make you step back and question everything you thought you knew about a subject.
That's
And
right.
so absolutely. Hey, so tell us a little bit about the work that you're specifically doing at ARLIS.
Well, my career has been focused on, and I'll use DoD terms, but I'll make relationships to kind of the broader environment. Really, our ability of our U.S. government and our Department of Defense to operate effectively in the information environment. How do we compete in that space in a very complex 21st century, world where information is becoming more and more of a competitive almost battle space, and that's both internal and external. And so my focus is in that area to bring that my expertise and background, and to help develop that part of the ARLIS mission set, to be able to help and drive applied research and potential solutions, but also be that center point for convening and bringing a community of interest together. And I'll talk more about that and why that's so powerful, and having a place for a watering hole for everyone, that trusted watering hole for people to come to and engage across the spectrum of interested parties.
So what's maybe a very naive question on my part, but is there a difference between information operations and information warfare? And if so, how are they different?
Yeah, well, they're not really, and so, as if you think about information operations, and if there's older definitions which we've evolved past, but we're still there. We're still working through, Department of Defenses anyway. And remember, the terms, both of those terms are defense oriented, defense frame terms. These are not meant to be broader U.S. government terms. These are ones that were coined and developed for the Department of Defense. But it's core to, integrating information related capabilities during military operations to influence, disrupt, corrupt our adversaries, and disrupt their command and control, their decision making and their ability for command and control while protecting our own. That was the original intent. We started Department of Defense started churning on this in the mid '90s, and we've it's been a roller coaster ride within the DoD on how we organize, how we define it, how we use terms to frame what we're doing. And I'll tell you right now that the Department of Defense is still struggling with that. And But there are some efforts underway to make some headway. We use at ARLIS, we use a term more broadly. You say information operations, information
Mhm.
warfare, military. We realize that we can compete in this space. It's an all-in proposition. I mean, everybody. It's a and so those the types of challenges we're facing from a national security standpoint, Mark, are also being faced by multinational corporations, by small companies, big companies, other institutions within, not only within the United States, but with many of our partner nations and others, where they have challenges to their brands, to their reputations,
Right, right, right.
to their ability to secure their own interest in their own decision space for their own corporate needs. So a lot of the tools, methods, techniques that are adversaries, and read adversaries are not, we got the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, we get all that, but there's others that compete against our interests and the interest of our partners and our economic enterprise and our, as you know, even internally, our own values and opinions are reshaped by false information and data, and it's incredibly difficult. So, try and answer your question. Those two terms are relatively similar in a military sense. We use a term called cognitive security. Imagine to at ARLIS also to broaden the effort and think about 21st century security architectures. You have cybersecurity, you have physical security. Imagine we also have a need for cognitive security. How do you protect your reputation? What's your reputation like on social media, Mark? And how do you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
ensure that that's protected? And how do corporations ensure their specific interests are protected and well understood? So, and so if we widen the I'll use our perspective. This is not something that's just a national security issue. It's a global security issue, and it also
Hmm.
includes, the private sector.
Yeah, so it's much more than just a military issue, even beyond
Absolutely,
business. Everyday
it
person in the street.
transcends all that.
So,
Right.
so even the college students walking around outside your office window, it's an issue they have to deal with as
You
well.
care about
Yeah,
what people think about them, right?
yeah.
And so, but but let's not there's been past associations when you think about information operations, information warfare. You'll see it in past in media and other places that they describe it as propaganda. They'll describe it as deceptive. They'll describe it as something nefarious. As if you, especially when you start thinking about DoD operating in this space, because it harkens back to times when the information environment was used for very nasty outcomes.
Yeah.
The reality is this is a major competitive space. It's a space we're in conflict right now.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's a it's perpetual state of conflict. It's a perpetual state of competition. And it's so how we organize to not only defend ourselves, but to proactively shape our own interest in this environment. But think about that the influence space. It is not just what we say; it's what we do,
Hmm.
and that comes in many forms, not only in language and culture, but it also comes in ones and zeros.
So if we zero into the technology, it seems like one of those classic examples where tech advancement can contribute positively to the world. Obviously, the internet has changed the way we live,
Mhm.
but it can also simultaneously open up opportunities for bad actors and maybe unforeseen circumstances.
Happening
Um,
right now.
yeah, could you talk a little bit about that? And discuss the technological issues, and misuse of the technology.
Well, I think some of it's not a mystery to
Yeah,
anybody.
yeah.
Using social media and transmedia platforms to push ideas or push uh, uh, um, data, no falsehoods, and to shape or shape the decision making, the attitudes and behaviors of others, and that's happening all over the place. We see this happening, uh, you know, every single day, and that doesn't. It's not necessarily directly tied to a Russian or Chinese, hacking or penetration or data collection. It's one company against another, individuals against groups, and we're even seeing that as sadly we're seeing that foment internal divisions.
Interesting.
Someone asked me, in fact, let me pull it up. And this is my opinion. Um, a student asked me, um, what will fighting in the information environment look like in 2030? And what does the U.S. and its allies need to do now and in the future to position our forces for success? And I kind of twisted that on him. I said, I think the information environment will continue to be used to fuel internal divisions, a threat almost greater than those of threats from opposing nation states. And in 2030, the OIE is a central battlefield where the U.S. does not have preeminent advantage. It levels out because there are those who will never match our military prowess, but can in fact have match or overmatch our information capabilities, and it's not just the capabilities; it's our willingness, it's the authorities, it's the our culture, it's our
Our
laws,
ethics, yeah.
and most importantly, our ethics, our foundation of ethics, and how we navigate this space to not only protect ourselves but also preserve the very rights and very law, the foundations of our culture. And so that's a touchy, very delicate balance, and a huge challenge.
So I almost hate to ask this question, but does that mean we're always going to be at a fundamental disadvantage against adversaries who lack those same ethical standards or limitations?
I think that we're going to have to respond and adapt and try and get in front of those gaps. And I think it is a perpetual state as technology evolves, as our adversaries' willingness to do whatever it takes to undermine our interests across the whole host. It's not just our military interests; it's everything we do. We see it happening in penetrations in businesses in the entertainment industry. We see it happening targeting our infrastructure. We see it happening our knowledge. They're stealing our
Yeah.
knowledge, and so it's the challenges associated with not only the technical solutions to try and protect us, but the ethical, legal, all the other issues that underpin our culture and the way we live that we also have to navigate. For example, how do you engage in social media at the same time ensuring that we're not violating terms of service for the multinational corporations that run those platforms? Where does national security and their business security and business interests collide, or where do they have mutual interest? All those discussions are happening right now, and are a constant state of discussion, engagement, and evolution. There's lots of tension, points of tension, but there's also opportunity there. And so it's I'll use this it's like being in a marriage. You got to work at it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife would certainly agree with that. Um, so I'm interested also in placing this in the context of other emerging technology areas, things like artificial intelligence, cyber,
Yeah.
even networking, space. Could you tell us a little bit about how information operations kind of fits in with those other technologies, those other components?
Well, it does. And if you don't mind, I'll take a moment and list some of those technologies that I think are directly relevant to this information environment competitive space. And and the reason I don't use the word information operations or information warfare because they're not only military but they're evolving
Right.
now within the Department of Defense. And I'll address that in a minute as the Department of Defense is struggling with its own, how it identifies and how it frames resources and organizes to compete in the space. But imagine that we need, and I'll list these out because these are ones that we've captured when I said on the defense science boards and on in other working with our military organization or foreign partners, algorithms for real-time detection of tracking beams at scale, specialized algorithms to recognize purposeful or deceptive messaging, misinformation, persuasion campaigns, and so forth. Scalable, efficient, and accurate social malware detection algorithms. Um, uh, Develop high fidelity diffusion models for messages, narratives, and information across social media. How do and um, Design incorporates social environmental models of context and its dynamics into algorithms that recognize. You hear me say algorithms a lot,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
so think about
mm-hmm,
the some people even call it algorithm warfare, but it's the competition of who's developed more rapidly developed the algorithms necessary to give you any technical advantage. But I'm integrate the image understanding and speech and natural language technologies to extend previously developed text-centric algorithms. Uh, refined methods of countering adversary influence operations. How do we detect, and I already mentioned fake images and fake uh, 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 um, data. And there's a whole list. So of technology. And by the way, and you know this, Mark, the Department of Defense or the Defense Enterprise, our FFRDCs, our UARCs, our labs, are not necessarily leading
Yeah. Yeah.
innovation in many of these places. It's the private sector. It's very different
Yeah.
than what it used to be, and it's also in a private sector that's not always part of the industrial enterprise, right? It's some of these unique, exquisite small companies that are working on other projects. I've engaged, and I know many of the NDI of the members of this organization are well aware of some of these, unique or smaller companies that are supporting, for example, our entertainment industry out not only in New York but out on the West Coast as they develop capabilities for that market and for that enterprise, and to be able to kind of capture and understand how some of those technologies might have application to our national security, global security needs. But these are not normal relationships. Some of these industries, some of these companies would not normally deal with the
Yeah.
Department of Defense, would not normally deal with the U.S. government, given sometimes the politics involved in that. So we don't get to benefit as easily as we'd like to from the extraordinary work and exquisite technologies and applications and methods that they're developing. So using FFRDCs and UARCs and others, where I mentioned the term Switzerland as a pathway for those collaborations is key. I view this competition in the information environment. The only way we could be successful in competing is through a network of networks. That network of networks extends beyond just the military structure. It includes industry, it includes the private sector outside of it, it includes our international partners and NGOs and many others who share interests. As important as it is for us to map the threat, we need to map the interests of all those who are in, I call them blue, but the all the folks that are not threatening our interests, but are out there taking care of
Right.
their own needs. And if we understand where those are and where they intersect global security or national security, there may be some aspects where we share. And let's talk, let's engage on that space. We're not trying to get them, invite them to just because they're
Yeah. Yeah.
patriots to come support us. They have interests too. And if we understand those better, we may be in a better position to have substantive and thoughtful conversations about how they may be, and what they're doing may have global security outcomes. And note, I say global.
So it's fascinating. Yeah, that's right. No,
Um, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would often note when I was in the Pentagon that sometimes I had a better understanding of what our competitors and the adversaries were doing than what we were doing, and it sounds like you're pointing the same issue in this space.
Well, and that you just teed
Yeah.
me up for part two. So we have the network of networks, but the network of networks doesn't naturally happen, right? So you have to use the power to convene to inspire. The tagline is you don't have to own it to integrate it. But I learned there's some examples from the past of General Petraeus, General Botel, when they were orchestrating the United States government and many of the partners to get at strategic issues in Afghanistan and Iraq. What they did is they used the power to convene, to bring everybody in a room. They didn't own it; they weren't in charge of all of that, but they drove an agenda that was inclusive, and that through the transparency of those interactions, there was a common orientation to everyone's actions because now they understood what the others were doing, and they would reframe or frame or their efforts accordingly. And so I believe, similar to support this network of network enterprise in in this information competitive space, is we have to utilize the power to convene to set the conditions to commonly orient to, and through shared interest and through mutual accountability. I know that in partnership with the OSD policy and the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence Security, um, ARLIS, is supporting, along with many others, supporting a conference series, a conference and workshop series called Phoenix Challenge. That is exactly what it's intended to do. Create a meeting platform, a watering hole, where the entire community of interest, include our international partners, industry, academia, and others, come in to not only share, collaborate, uh, to plan and to work together. And these are executed quarterly, so there's some accountability, where it's an outcome-based conference series, not just a bunch of folks sitting around a table and having conversations. And so we then not only describe but prescribe the actions to take to be able to kind of harness the enterprise without trying to command and control it. I mean, the moment you start trying to control, so that's when it starts to break apart. It's convene, commonly orient, and well considered. Industry, other partners will be informed by all these interactions, and then address how they can compete in this space accordingly. And then there's a third part of this. It's called activate and orient, where you take what limited resources we have in the Department of Defense or U.S. government, and will then be better informed how to invest that resource to activate and orient some of these activities, what's in your specific interests of national security or global security. And I have a couple of great examples of that where they're unique.
Please, yes.
If you're interested, Mark.
That was actually going to be my next question.
Well, so let me give you a couple examples of activate and orient. There was when I was at the National Counterterrorism Center, we realized that we needed campaigns to counter violent extremism. But we were looking for all sorts of ways to how to activate and orient, and where could these efforts be developed, realizing that influence is really local. And so there was there's great effort that was already going on in the private sector, where a company was utilizing university students to develop campaigns for private industry. Like, when BP had their Gulf, their incident, they actually hired this company to work with college students to come up with, hey, what are the kind of influence campaigns that we need to undertake to kind of change the attitudes of folks towards our industry, specifically BP. Porsche was doing the same thing. How do we influence? And what they thought is, why don't we utilize university students, and because they're actually involved in critical thinking. And then it's not just regular, they combine social scientists, kids studying social science, with kids studying cyber, with kids studying other technologies and engineers, and they put them into one course structure, one 15-week course structure with credit to kind of develop some of these ideas. And the industry would pay the academic institution through this company to help them develop some of these ideas. We said, let's do the same thing for countering violent extremism. So they developed a program called Peer-to-Peer that was getting multiple universities over a 15-week period to develop localized counter-violent extremism ideas in the digital space, social media, whatever these groups of students led by a professor would do, and there'd be a little bit of money to give them so they could actually build out their plan and then present it. They would compete them, and they would compete against each other to see who racked and stacked at the top. We invited, and we were Department of Defense, we invited industry, Facebook, many others to come and judge, be the judges. Facebook liked it so much years back and said, hey, we would like to do this. We'd like to take this on and kind of do this for ourselves. These are little mini incubators that we're driving, great ideas every 15 weeks. So they took it on, and now it's called the Facebook Digital Challenge, and they do it in 100 universities or so every quarter or so. And that's an idea of activate and orient. Originally, it was a U.S. government DoD idea.
And now it's industry.
Completely belongs to Facebook, and they're out there doing it, and it's a fantastic effort on their part. Originally focused on countering violent extremism, now really focused on disinformation. So that's one example. Then there's another one where we got Hollywood producers, directors, content, who felt they're and many of them are national assets, right? Because of their skill in storytelling and developing content to influence. And so, how do we take small groups of them and help them enable some of our international partners, enable their ability to storytell, to scale some of their. Remember, influence is local. The United States may have our tools, technologies, method. We have great prowess and capability there, but we certainly don't have credibility in many areas, particularly in different foreign locations. But these folks do, but they may not have the ability to scale their efforts. So we help them understand and bring small teams of really noted Hollywood folks who are committed to helping develop national security, and they do these little projects to we had originally called them incubators program, where we go and help inspire and develop. And what's interesting, the Hollywood folks come out with content for other programming that's gone off into Netflix and gone off to other areas. Again, this was all inspired by the Department of Defense ideas and people, and but not funded by us because it's not our space. But we thought it was part of the global security and global security interest. So convene to inspire, activate, and orient.
Excellent, excellent, awesome, Rich. Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. As in so many of these segments, I feel like I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but alas, our time is limited. But maybe I can have you back at some later date for a follow on conversation, because I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Hey, Mark, not a problem. There's so much here,
Absolutely.
and I think we only scrape the surface.
Yeah, understood. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your work with the university, but also your work on part of national defense. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Great talking to you.